Hook is one of those movies that lives rent-free in part of my adult brain that reminds me of my precious childhood. As I talk about it, I can feel those nostalgic memories coming back to me. Those rainy Saturday evenings when I would pester my dad to play the movie that basically forced him to take out the DVD of Hook. He would say, "How many times are you going to watch the same movie?" And I just remember I was happy just to watch it as many times as possible. For 2.5 hours, I was convinced that flying was something one could just remember how to do. I also wanted to use my imagination to have a spread of all my favorite foods at the dinner table and have it with my friends. Even today, I want to stay in a treehouse like the one they showed in the Lost Boys hideout. But I always get a little emotional thinking about how Peter learned how to fly by thinking about his happiest moments as a dad. I think as a grown-up, you understand Peter on a much deeper level that you don't usually pay attention to as a child. Of course, Robin Williams, being the actor he is, balanced the character's childishness and vulnerability so well. He really taught us that even if you have to grow up, you don't really need to lose your inner child and warmth. And trust me, I'm old enough to know that the critics absolutely tore this movie apart when it came out. So, being an adult, I unlocked my critical analysis skill to go through all the reviews and the arguments, and have reached the conclusion that they aren't entirely wrong. But none of that actually changes how I feel when my favorite actor, Robin Williams, comes up on my screen and I get to visit Neverland once again, with John Williams' music score playing in the background. Spielberg made Neverland feel like an actual dreamland. I wish I could use a time machine and go back in time, but since I can't, I'll yap about why a movie like Hook was dismissed by the critics, but loved by the audience at the same time. If you're interested, which I know you are, join me. The expectations from Hook were huge. When you look back at December of 1991, people were totally hyped for the film. It was going to be a big holiday blockbuster film with a cast like Robin Williams, Dustin Hoffman, and Julia Roberts. On top of that, it was a Steven Spielberg film. This film was supposed to be a reimagination where Peter Pan grew up and forgot who he was. He became a workaholic lawyer who forgot that he had a family to spend quality time with. He'd even find himself in a very troubling position where he would have to find himself again. There's even a story behind the script of the film. James V. Hart, who was one of the writers of the screenplay, was asked by his son Jake, what if Peter Pan grew up? Unlike most people, he didn't brush that question away. He thought on it. He wrote the initial script, and when Spielberg read the screenplay, he felt so happy that he could finally adapt Peter Pan, which was a lifelong dream. Since it was technically Jake who came up with the inspiration, Spielberg cast him as one of the Lost Boys in the battle scenes. This movie was supposed to impress everyone, but the critics weren't pleased by it at all. The movie also made close to $300.9 million against the $70 million budget, so you can't really say it was a huge box office disappointment. But given that the movie was released during the holiday time period and with such good cast and crew, it was considered a financial letdown. Honestly, it just didn't reach the sky-high expectations people had set for it. Now, personally, I think the critics completely missed the point. That's how it felt to be a kid and watch the movie for the first time. They judged the film from an adult perspective. For many of us, Hook was not just a fun adventure story. It was more relatable than you think. Peter Banning grew to be a corporate lawyer who was always busy on his cell phone closing deals. He talked to his clients more than his family. In the course of time, he became a chronically late dad who lost touch with his own kids. He forgot his son Jack's league game because of those business calls. Even though he was physically present in the room, he was always absent where it actually mattered. It's something that some of us have experienced in our childhood, but somehow we grew up to become busybodies as well. Going back to the story, Peter and Moira's children, Jack and Maggie, got kidnapped when they were out for dinner. They came back to an empty house and found a note left by Captain James Hook. Peter had no memory of who the hell this Captain Hook was, but he was actually his archenemy. Hook took the kids to Neverland so that he could lure Peter back there to have his revenge. Wendy, who took care of Peter as an orphan, reminded Peter that his true childhood identity was Peter Pan. She said he had to go back to Neverland to save his kids because nobody else could do that apart from him. But he didn't believe her until Tinkerbell came to fly him to Neverland. He met Hook there and challenged him to fly and save his kids, but he failed at it miserably. Hook was having the time of his life watching Peter struggle, so he ordered Peter's execution. But then Tinkerbell came to the rescue and asked Hook to give her just 3 days to train Peter and come up with a challenge. Now, his biggest challenge was to figure out how to fly and how to find his old self again. That sums up the premise of the movie. After this, Peter would face a lot of obstacles, make new friends, learn cool new stuff, find his inner child again, and save his children from Hook. From being a father who had no time for his kids, he would understand the value of spending time with them. Now, the critics had a lot to say about the movie. One of the famous American critics, Roger Ebert, very bluntly called out the film as a cluttered rag and bone shop of art direction, with too many characters, props, and costumes and no real sense of place. He also dismissed the film's core flaw directly, writing that the screenplay was little more than a hook on which to hang a new version of the Peter Pan story. Vincent Canby of the New York Times had a similar complaint, but in a different font. He said he was overwhelmed by a screenplay heavy with complicated exposition. He felt the story structure was unbalanced and that Spielberg leaned too heavily on art direction instead of the narrative. USA Today's Mike Clark was even harsher about the pacing, and he wrote that Hook grows unbearable once a grown-up Peter arrives in Neverland with a merciless 90 minutes to go. Then the Boston Globe went ahead and dismissed the entire emotional core and said that Hook touches neither fantasy nor soulfulness nor yearning. There were so many other critics as well, and here's the twist. Forget about these critics, Spielberg himself did not like this film. He mentioned this while he was promoting his other films, but he always ended up giving the exact same answer. He said he felt like a fish out of water making this film. He did have confidence in his first act and the epilogue, but not in the body of the story in between. He even admitted that his uncertainty about the material actually pushed him to have a more elaborate production design. The more unsure he became of the project, the bigger and more colorful his sets became. That way, he was trying to compensate. You could say he's an expert because he predicted the exact same things way before the critics complained about it. He even shared in a different interview that he was kind of uncomfortable with how stylized Neverland looked. So the biggest critic of this film is the director himself. But here's the irony. He disliked the things that millions of children grew up adoring. He expressed this while he's promoting his other films. That's why children loved Hook the most. He understood why kids love E.T., but he struggled to understand what Hook meant to children. It's such an irony that he made a film about a father who forgot to see the magic in front of his eyes. And he ended up in that same position. He couldn't see the magic that his film created. Apart from these, even to this day, you'll constantly hear complaints like it's too long, it's too messy, floating in the air. People think 2 hours was too long for the film. But initially it was supposed to be a 3-hour musical with at least 7 original songs. Spielberg was worried about the film's duration, so he brought it down to 2 hours and 2 original songs in the theatrical release. Some think the pacing actually sags in the middle. Also, the father-son emotional sequences didn't always land smoothly. And let me tell you, the Neverland scenes, in which all the audience loved most, were actually the most criticized by the critics. People said they could have done a better job in representing Neverland. They made a fantasy dreamland like Neverland looked way too artificial. The additional scenes also felt like they were over-rehearsed and overproduced more than required. And considering it was a Spielberg work, people expected the magic to feel like something special that would blow our minds. But even that felt whimsical. By the time the noise got settled, Hook's ratings crashed down to 29% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. Even today, Hook sits at just 37% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, while the audience score is a much higher 76%. It was truly brutal for a director like Spielberg after he made films like E.T. and Jaws. But Spielberg somehow always managed to pull off this father-son hook in most of his works. We saw it in Jurassic Park as well, where Alan Grant slowly bonded with the two kids while the world fell apart around them. But according to the critics, it didn't work out well in Hook. Now here's where the critics and the audience, especially the kids, go in different directions when it comes to the reviews. Both sections were watching a completely different movie. Because look into their priorities. On one hand, we have the critics who were counting down the minutes, were grading the art direction, and analyzing the plot. On the other hand, we have the kids who lost their minds seeing Rufio's insane mohawk. They were just thrilled to watch pirate ships, the floating clocks, and the wildest use of imagination. Apart from that, they just saw a grown-ass man forget everything and then remember it all and reconnect with his children. Like me, nobody actually under the age of 12 finished Hook in 1991 and had the slightest thought about complaining about the pacing. They just walked around yelling, "Bangarang!" I still remember back in school, we used to shout that word during recess. I don't think any of us gave a damn about how artificial looking Neverland was in our childhood. We just wanted to be there, and that was it. This film was basically injected into the veins of every kid back in the 90s. If they were the critics, I think Rotten Tomato ratings would have soared just from the experience of it. Unlike the critics who judged the film as the final product, these kids loved different individual scenes and they lived in those scenes in their heads. Leaving the kids, even the general audience, was positive towards the film. Therefore, I think the best part about this film is that you watch it from a different perspective as you age. As a child, we used to focus on different things. As an adult, you see things a bit differently. But it hits every single time. And the same group of kids who loved Hook grew up and suddenly their perspective altered. Somewhere along the line, Peter Banning, the character who we all found kind of boring as children, who basically stood between us and all the fun stuff in Neverland, stopped being boring. He started to feel more familiar. 10-year-old me won't ever believe that I actually relate to Peter Banning now. Slumped with work, constant responsibility stacking up on top of each other, and missing time with my family. We grew up way faster than we expected. Somehow, just like Peter, most of us lost touch with the hobbies that used to make us happy and the crazy imaginations that used to come naturally to us. The movie that we once loved because Peter Banning learned how to fly over time turned into a movie that we actually understand. Because, finally, we understand why Peter forgot how to fly. I don't think anyone who reviewed this film back in December of 1991 saw this switch coming. That's exactly why the movie aged so well. It was like a letter to our future selves that someday we'll also need to remember how to fly again. Like, if you remember, Peter spent most of his time in the film living in Neverland. And while he was there, he desperately forced himself to become like Peter Pan once again and learn how to fly. But every time he tried, he failed miserably. In return, he got humiliated by Rufio and the Lost Boys for not being able to do such a simple task. But later, they realized Peter was their old friend and they began helping him. They told him to stop being a practical, broody adult and use his imagination for a change. To fly again, he needed to feel things closely. He was always so busy with work that he didn't even realize that he'd stopped to feel and cherish things. The moment he actually let his guard down and allowed his emotions to take over, that's when he got close to his goal. His brain played out his happiest memories, and what came to his mind was the time when Jack was born. And finally, he could fly without having to force himself. When you see that as a kid, your first thought is like, yes! He can fly now, it's so cool. When you watch this part as an adult, it's like an emotional gut punch. There's also another scene that moved me a lot. It was a clock smashing scene where Jack smashed all the clocks in a room to take out his pent-up resentment towards his dad. Now, of course, it had something to do with Captain Hook. He was the one who manipulated Jack and basically rubbed salt in his wounds to make him feel that way towards his father. It's heart-wrenching to see the father and son so distant, but actually Jack and Maggie both live with an emotionally distant father. So Jack's outburst was understandable, but what pains me more is that Peter saw how happy his son was with Hook. It had been a long time since he'd seen his son being so happy. At that moment, he just felt all those years of regret. He didn't try to interfere and stop his son, rather he realized his own mistakes and understood that his son's happiness was something he already missed. Then he went to fight Captain Hook, defeated him, and came back home with his kids. And this time, he made sure to throw away his work cell and actually save more time for his family. You fall in love with Peter more for only one person, and that's for Robin Williams. It's insanely difficult to juggle 3 versions of one character in a single movie. Peter Banning was always stressed, distant, and frightened of his own children's disappointment. Then we had Peter Pan, who was like a big bowl of sunshine, always being happy, fearless, spontaneous, and that was somewhere hidden underneath the adult of Peter Banning. Then eventually we saw the 3rd version of Peter Banning, who found his inner child, Peter Pan. My favorite part is where Pockets, one of the Lost Boys, studies Peter's aging face, pulls at his cheeks, and suddenly recognizes the boy underneath, saying, "Oh, there you are, Peter." Robin Williams is one of the finest actors in Hollywood, and it's not a surprise he did justice to this character. But still, the way he balanced both Peter's childish acts and his deep-rooted sadness just deserves a lot of respect. It really takes some rare skill to express emotions through facial expressions the way he does in this movie. There's another important cast member who really made the film what it was. He's right there in the title. Dustin Hoffman really stole the spotlight as Captain Hook. I told you how he was manipulative, but there's so much more to his character. He was exactly the opposite of Peter. On one hand, Peter Pan grew up to become Peter Banning and almost forgot about his childhood identity. Whereas there was Captain Hook, who never moved on and was always busy planning and plotting his revenge against his childhood rival. He still felt insecure about what happened years ago. Therefore, unlike Peter, he appeared to be childish. But his antics were still so hilarious, and my younger self was slightly scared of him as well, which I don't really like to admit. I think Mr. Smee, aka Bob Hoskins' character, makes him even better. They behave like an exhausted married couple. But Hook was so evil for what he did to Peter and Jack. He knew Peter's real vulnerability was his son, so he never used any magic to bully Jack or imprison him. Instead, he gave him his attention and spent time with him. Jack was already upset with his father for constantly missing important moments in his life. Hook understood that and acted as the father figure that Peter didn't. The baseball game was one such instance. Hook staged a faked baseball game in Neverland to manipulate Jack. He rooted for him in the match, cheered loudly, and even asked the entire crowd to celebrate him. Jack felt his father never did anything like that, and so he got close with him. Little did he know that he was just getting used for revenge. But Hook knew that by doing this, he could easily create a rift between Peter and Jack without even trying that hard. Hook basically made Jack feel like he was attending his games, although his father never really tried to attend his games. After this, Jack's resentment towards his dad grew even more. He, as a villain, just won that moment by simply being emotionally available for Peter's child. I also think Rufio as a character, played by Dante Bosco, did not get the right amount of appreciation that he deserved. He wasn't a part of the traditional story, but he still managed to become one of the most remembered characters from the movie. He was the one who created a resistance to Peter. He believed that Peter Banning couldn't just swoop in and announce himself as Peter Pan, especially when they spent years thinking Peter abandoned them. Therefore, Rufio had become the Lost Boys leader in Peter's absence. Even if he looked like a middle school kid, his attitude didn't match that. When he finally accepted Peter, it was because he'd earned that forgiveness and acceptance. His death actually caused serious consequences in the final battle as well. His final moments kind of reinforced Peter's entire journey as a father. But forget the seriousness, their banter is just so fun to see. The way they had that rap battle of insults at the dinner table, Peter couldn't use his imagination to eat food while the Lost Boys could easily do that. He and the Lost Boys always laughed at Peter whenever he acted like an irritated, anxious adult. Like when he asked them not to hold the sword and got frustrated and asked them who their teacher was. And while they had these petty fights with each other, somewhere we all got attached to their banter. The film as a whole is already nostalgic for me, and so is each of the characters. But what made me the most nostalgic was its score. John Williams knew what he was doing when he was making the background score for this film. Take out the score, and the film will feel naked. He was the one who actually added all the magic to the movie, and it just added so much emotion to the normal script. He added the feelings of adventure, sadness, wonder, and innocence. The score really made the film what it was. Before Peter Banning believed he could fly, the music already believed it. So you could say, along with Peter, John Williams also did half of the flying. Even today, if I hear a tune from that score, I know I'll get a full-blown nostalgia of the time when I used to sit too close to the TV and feel that Neverland was real. Look, I'm not going to end this by saying and pretending that Hook was a flawless and misunderstood masterpiece, because it wasn't. The critics weren't entirely wrong about the length of the film. Even in the middle of the film was actually really messy. There were just too many plot lines, like Peter training himself for the challenge, him building a relationship with the Lost Boys, topped with their funny banter and all the food fights. Then came Jack bonding with Hook and Peter getting hurt. On top of that, there was Tinkerbell's unrequited love for Peter Pan. There were also so many private sequences before the final battle actually happened. We spent a lot of time watching Peter Banning transform into Peter Pan. In some of these sequences, the sentimentality might have felt a little overwhelming. Even the action wasn't really Spielberg's best work. All of these plotlines weren't wrapped up properly. Spielberg knows that himself. But, once again, these practical points or flaws don't erase what the movie actually does so well. Robin Williams and Dustin Hoffman left such unforgettable performances that we still admire them to this day. Speaking of John Williams, any compliment falls short of the score he made for this movie. Rufio's character added so much meaning to the film, and the father-son bonding just meant everything to me. And no matter what, my love for Neverland can never change, no matter how old I get. And above everything else, the way the movie shared this beautiful idea that growing up doesn't mean you have to lose the person you were when you were young is my favorite thing about this film. So let's call it a truce once and for all. Maybe the critics saw everything that was wrong with Hook, and the kids saw everything that was worth remembering for the movie. That's why the whole generation of kids loved the film, grew up, forgot about Neverland for a while, but somehow, we eventually find our way back. And in that way, no movie has ever felt this close and real to our younger selves. So with that, we come to the end of today's video. Let us know in the comments below what you love the most about Hook. And before you leave, don't forget to like our videos, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more of our marvelous videos. Stay safe, have a great day, and as always, stay marvelous.